I will call Alanna right now. I cannot. Hello, Alanna.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, we have to. This is very, very loud. Let me turn the volume down a little bit. I cannot. No, there's no control. Hello, Alanna. Very, very nice to see you.
Hi, Trevor.
So there's a room with a few students here, so you can see me, but you can't really see them. It's always a bit awkward to do these talks. I realize, and let me hide my messy desktop. Okay. So I was telling students that we are talking to you from the future. So you are in the future and we are in the past. Thursday already in Wellington, New Zealand, right? Is that correct?
That's right. Yep, calling in from New Zealand where it is tomorrow and the middle of summer.
Fantastic. So for those of you here, so Alanna is a really, extremely interesting person. She describes herself as a doer and a natural-born leader. So this will become interesting when we talk to her later about Bossless leadership. I was, of course, thinking about my own very long credentialed email signature, which these kinds of things that you refer to as well in your talk. So today, Alanna will explore the bossless leadership and cooperative governance. She's also working on participatory technology, impact entrepreneurship, and collaborating with money. And she has founded and built a number of cooperative startups at the intersection of open source technology and social impact, including Inspiro, Lumio, Co-Budget, and Open Collective. So if you are not familiar with those, that's like they matter a great deal. So these are really important projects that have resonated, globally, right? I'm not exaggerating here, Alanna. So I think Lumio alone is used by what, 60, 70 organizations, right? Probably more than that.
Many, many more than that. Thousands now, I think.
Thousands now, yeah, well, incredible. And also Open Collective is incredibly relevant to the students today. And I think this whole discussion is super interesting, talking of bossless organizations or bossless leadership, because I think in the platform co-op community, we encounter a lot of people who say, that they don't want to work in hierarchical institutions. The perks that their parents got out of corporations don't really exist for them anymore. So that's not these kind of organizations for them anymore. Last week, we talked about, some people reporting from within big tech companies that even they are now quite hierarchical, lost a lot of that meaning that was originally, part of why they took this job. And so they are also looking for jobs, right? So, and talking to cooperatives around the world, I think this issue, and this we talked about this a second ago when we set this talk up, Alanna, right, is that co-ops really around the world identified like governance, so this way in which people make decisions together, as their biggest problem, right? So it's like incredibly timely and important topic, and I'm really like super honored to have Alanna here. So we said we would make it sort of rather informal and also not incredibly long and structured, so like have it a little bit more of an open format. And I think Alanna would very much welcome if you jump in with questions, right? So I know sometimes with the other talks this was different, but Alanna explicitly pointed this out. So yeah, just handing it over to you. Alanna, I just wanted to maybe let us not forget the questions that you posed for us, which is, what's a useful definition of leadership in the cooperative context? How might leadership and governance functions be decentralized? What is one concrete action or experiment you can try in your own context? All right, handing it over.
All right. Thanks, Trevor. Is there any way you can show me who's in the room at all, or is that too hard?
I'm a little scared because it is, if I touch this,
Oh, yeah.
the streaming setup will be messed with.
Okay, fair enough. I'll just imagine all your lovely faces. very glad to be here today. And yeah, thank you for that introduction, Trevor. That was very thorough. Um, I have been working in cooperative networks and organizations for quite a long time now. Back when I was in university, I lived in a housing cooperative, and in my professional life, I've been working in decentralized collaborative networks and co-ops, and have done a lot of experimentation and learning and building tools, both kind of social tools and technical tools, to help support best practice for leadership and governance have become focuses of mine. Yeah, I think this leadership word, I keep coming back to it because I don't know, it's one of those things where I keep sort of unpicking it and digging deeper, and it keeps being interesting. I think that leadership has a certain definition kind of out there in the old paradigm, sort of a more hierarchical paradigm. That's one thing, but in our cooperative paradigm, we need to kind of reclaim this word and really understand what it can mean for us. So this is a big part of my own explorations, trying to understand what leadership can be in a different context when there aren't necessarily bosses or hierarchies. I still think we need leadership, and it's very important. And then I am also very interested in governance, and I think those things overlap in certain ways, and they're different in certain ways. But I have made tools and practices for governance. Lots of different experiments. I think that we're all learning together in this area, so I do consider most of what I work on to be experimental. My current focus is on this project Open Collective, which is a tool for fundraising, transparent fundraising in the collaborative context, so specifically for collaborative communities where it's not appropriate for one person to sort of own them or hold the money, and instead it needs to be this decentralized function. And through that role, I get to see a window into lots and lots of different projects. And I think money is a very, very interesting and sort of focusing element because it's so concrete and it's so quantifiable. It starts to highlight or bring to the surface some really interesting questions like, well, okay, there's money, there's budget sitting here. Who decides what we do with it? What is the connection between our resourcing and our strategy? And it just immediately surfaces all these really important governance questions. So that's one of the reasons why I think money is an interesting tool to apply to these issues.
I think one thing is just because, so in the United States, as you probably know, like every third person is a freelancer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
65 million is probably an exaggeration, but like one survey came up with that number, 65 million people. So, like what you're doing, especially within Spiral, can function really as an inspiration to a lot of people here. Maybe can you talk a little bit about Inspiral?
Sure. Inspiral is a network of, I guess you call them social entrepreneurs. It started in New Zealand here in Wellington, but it's now quite global. We just had our summer Inspiral gathering last week, and we had people from lots of different countries, which is always exciting. But it's basically, I would say, a solidarity network and an experimentation space for new ways of doing business and new ways of doing cooperation. And it has involved, yeah, a lot of different factors. People starting companies together, people figuring out how to weave social values into business models, and then, of course, the actual running of the network itself, which is, many hundreds of people now. So immediately raising questions of like, well, how do hundreds of people make decisions about everything, policies, how the network works, who gets to join, how does that work, money, how is this thing funded, all these things, because it's a very sort of practical, action-oriented network. There has been lots of opportunities for experimentation in all of these questions, and out of that, Inspiral has developed several tools. Some of them have taken the form of companies that put out a product, such as Lumia, which is an online tool for collaborative decision making, which I was involved in starting. And some of them are more kind of social processes or memes or ideas that go out as like part of, like, there's an Inspiral handbook that talks about all the policies and how decision making works, and how people relate to each other, and that's all out there for other people to potentially use or copy or adapt. And also We wrote a book. Book is called Better Work Together, and because it's from Inspiral, of course, it includes many different voices and many different stories, and it's a truly sort of collaborative look at what have we learned from basically 10 years of pretty radical, I would say, experimentation. And Spiral, because it's such a strong solidarity network, has created space for people to really throw themselves into this new paradigm kind of work. It enabled me to work on nothing but open source collaborative technology social enterprise tech startups, which is like an incredibly esoteric area that but I've been doing that for like 10 years because there's enough activity and resourcing and connections and everything through that network.
So just imagine, it sounds a bit intimidating maybe. I could imagine to like somebody who comes to this, with fresh eyes. Can you just say like sort of how this started? So like imagine like, I don't know, there are 3 or 4 here. So this is, the new school is very strong on design, right? So there are a lot of designers here and creative people. So let's say they want to start something like Inspiral. How did this actually, how did this start? Like, I mean, it wasn't hundreds of people in the beginning, right? And what did they
In the
actually do,
beginning,
right? Like, why did they come together and how would you actually do this? And what's the advantage? Like, why even bother? I mean, why do this?
yeah, good question. Inspiral started as basically a freelancers cooperative. It started with computer programmers and then quickly included designers and related professions. And it was people who were drawn together because they had these professional skills and they were perhaps doing contracts or had some gigs going, but they really cared about having a positive impact on the world, and we're trying to get together to figure out how do we use our working lives and our resources to do positive impact work. And then also we're interested in a much more community oriented or cooperative oriented way of doing the whole freelancer thing. So the first company that Inspiral was, it started as one company, which was Inspiral Services, which was, like a freelancer sort of umbrella organization that allowed people to kind of even out some of the ups and downs with income and have a solidarity group around you to help you out if you had problems or you needed help, or maybe you had an opportunity that was bigger than just you could fulfill by yourself, so you wanted to pull in trusted colleagues to work together, but it was sort of a really highly flexible way almost of doing an agency, but a cooperative model of an agency. And that got some money flowing through the system and allowed more and more people to kind of leave their day jobs and jump into this new way of working together. And then it grew from there into it started, as a network of individuals who wanted to work together in this solidarity network, mostly freelancers, and then it kind of grew into a network of companies. So different kinds of professionals, like accountants or something like that, who need to work in a different way than computer programmers doing contracts, but share the same values. And then many other ventures, and then through various experiments, coming up with product ideas or other service company ideas, and these things popping up all over. And then figuring out, okay, well, then how do we support a network of ventures or companies? And then it just, growing from there.
Okay, so there's a question. So maybe can you jump up and come just here? So then this is exciting in many ways because also Alanna sees I'm not pretending that there are other people here. They are actually here.
Oh, hello. There are real people there.
So you mentioned that like eventually got money running through it. Was it just working on contracts mostly, or did it like sort of launch as like its own business?
Yeah, at the very beginning, it really was based on contracts. It was literally like the guy who originally started it, his name is Joshua, and he just started signing up for more programming contracts than he could actually deliver, and then bringing in other people to help work on them. And it started as simple as that, and just having trust-based relationships and solidarity-based relationships at the beginning. And then sort of just building in a responsive way to what came along and the direction that people seemed to want to head. It was a very emergent emergent, fast-changing thing in the early years. It's settled down a little bit now because there's, kind of more of established vocabulary and structures and stuff like that. But I think there is a lot of potential for people who are oriented to these kinds of values to just start working together. Like, for example, I work now through a very small cooperative here in New Zealand. It's just 3 of us, and we all do freelancing kind of contracts. My contract, with Open Collective is through this cooperative, and the same for my other 2 cooperators, and we do income sharing. We do full income sharing. So if somebody doesn't have a contract for a period of time, we just still share all the income that comes in, and that just totally changes the game when it comes to sort of I guess you call it gig economy or freelancing. You can have like your sort of mini tiny little union or co-op or whatever you want to say. It doesn't have to be huge to make a big difference in your life. So I guess I would just say that solidarity is a really, really important and powerful force that you can totally tap into by deciding how you want to work with your trusted collaborators.
So, like when you think about your experience, so for many years you worked in these solidarity networks and the experimenting with this sort of bossless leadership, right? So, do you have like a few key takeaways maybe for people who maybe, again, like quite practically want to implement this, who want to start an experiment with that, maybe with their friends, starting a small co-op or organization that doesn't have these hierarchies? Like what should they watch out for?
Yeah, I think that first of all, it's important to remember that just because you're rejecting some of the ways that you may have seen leadership or power hierarchies implemented in other contexts, like most people have experiences in hierarchies, whether that's their family or their school or their workplace, which are maybe negative. Just because you're sort of throwing that out doesn't remove the need for dealing with power dynamics and dealing with leadership. It just means you have to kind of deconstruct and reconstruct what it means and how it's going to work for you. But if you leaving a vacuum in that space is not going to be effective. And this has been pretty well discussed. You can read The Tyranny of Structurelessness by Jeff Freeman. Yeah, exactly. And that's written in the 70s, so it's been a while.
So do you want to sum that up, or do you want me to sum it up?
Well, you go ahead. I'd be really interested to hear your summary of it.
So it's a really famous text, The Tyranny of Structurelessness, which quite simply asserts that if there is no formal structure, like a formal hierarchy or institution in a collaboration, that then essentially old boys network, right, old existing social networks kick in and they become the force. Do I reflect this in a correct way for you?
Yeah, that's right. Basically, if you don't have some other alternative explicit way that you're dealing with this stuff, what you'll get is unspoken, implicit, problematic power dynamics. And so I would say just take it on as something that you're going to deal with explicitly with the people that you're collaborating with. Even if it is a hierarchy, it's so much healthier just to admit it and say, oh, well, we're going to be a hierarchy and that works for us for these reasons, and this person's going to be in charge. And that can be okay. And that can actually be ethical and non-coercive if people are opting into that structure and it's the best choice for you. Obviously, I usually prefer to go with other structures, but you have to talk about it. Power dynamics are like a force of nature. They're an emergent property of human groups. They don't go away just because you're trying to reject them. You have to deal with them. So just talk about how do you want power to work in your group? Who's going to be responsible for what? How are decisions made? There are going to be people with certain skills, including leadership. And so how does that work? What is the culture and structure that is going to support healthy service-based leadership for your group? Not pretending like it's not needed or doesn't exist, but really thinking carefully about what it means to you. And this can be quite deep work. Like, we're, for the most part in our culture, not raised with experiences of healthy non-coercive power dynamics and non-hierarchical governance structures because of the culture. We're in this wider hierarchical capitalist system, so it's a radical act to sort of reclaim the power of those things and decide how you want to make it work for you.
What do you make of the I mean, you probably know that Zappos, right, the shoe company, is famously run in that way, right? So they eradicated hierarchies and everybody is the boss. And apparently, like from what I've heard, the workers hate it. They want their manager because now they are in charge, right? And I don't know, like that's one reference. A second one, I know the founder or CEO of Red Hat, right, the open source company, wrote this book, The Open Organization, where he tries to sort of apply, and you in your bio also assert this, right, that in a way maybe one can take the principles of open source development and just sort of map them onto human relationships in general or work teams in particular. What are your thoughts on that? It's like Chris
I
Kelty
think
wrote a good book on this as well, right?
yeah, there's definitely some good books out there. The other one I'd recommend is called Reinventing Organizations, which is a book of case studies of companies who are trying to work
Laloux, right?
somewhat differently. Sorry?
Laloux, right?
Yeah, Frederick Laloux. That's right. That's a very good book to read. I would say there are interesting things we can learn from these case studies and from these companies, but in my view, they don't go far enough because they don't touch the ownership question. And what you'll see in all of those examples is, we'll do this like kind of decentralized leadership in management, but there's never a conversation about, okay, but who controls where the money goes? Who controls where the profit goes? Who controls the governance of the actual company? Who's on the board? And unless you're willing to actually go there and talk about the ownership question, I think it's perhaps just superficial.
Okay, there's a question. Jump up and come to the front.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm another real-life human over here.
Hello?
I'm wondering,
He's alive, he said.
for people less familiar with collaborative decision-making and collective governance, would you be able to give an example of a decision that was made in the Inspiro network or somewhere else that you were involved that was challenging and how you worked through that as a group?
Sure. Oh man, so many challenges have been worked through. It's a great question. Yeah, a lot of times it's not easy. Like the decision-making muscle is one that a group has to exercise together, and it's a skill that you build over time. And it can go wrong in so many ways. It can go wrong both ways. I think the first thing you think of is, oh, well, what if people aren't included or people are left out or alienated and stuff, and that's a problem for sure. But it can just as easily go wrong the other way, where it's like trying to include everyone too much and it's going way too slow, and you like really have to build this skill in balancing agility and speed and efficiency with inclusivity and thoroughness. I think there's a lot of people who have experience with, say, housing cooperatives, or maybe they went to General Assemblies during Occupy or all this stuff. You might have this experience of sitting in these like incredibly long, incredibly frustrating meetings where maybe certain voices are dominating and it's just dragging on forever, or you're constantly having to deal with the same drama over and over again, or you just don't get anywhere. So yeah, it's a real whole skill set. And so the things that I would throw out there are ongoing conversation about how are we making decisions together. Is it working for us? How can we improve this process? Ongoing devolution of power as much as possible. Like you need a balance of people need to feel like they have access to decision-making power in the organization, that if something's important to them, that they have a channel for having their voice heard, and that but they also need to be empowered as individuals, not just as a collective, to not ask everybody's permission for every single thing they're going to do, and actually know when is it a good time to just go ahead, or to ask the 2 or 3 people that are most relevant and just make a call. And there are lots of cool processes and decision-making frameworks that can help you with this. And I would just put it all under the heading of kind of facilitation. So facilitation is a whole skill set that I think is not talked about enough and not valued enough in our culture and in our organizations. I work as a facilitator sometimes, and the thing that's blown me away, continues to blow me away, is how many people have never, ever been through an actual good meeting, that's facilitated well, and that where like everything's on time and you get through what you need to get through, and you can have the hard conversations you need to have, but you know when to move on. And I haven't been through a bad meeting in the last 10 years because like I'm there to facilitate it, or somebody else who's equally poured time into building these skills is there. And the tools that I've made are like Lumia, for example, are to help more and more people have this good experience. But I would say constantly be working on those skills. Look into decision-making frameworks. Like, for example, the advice process is one that's talked about a lot about in that book I mentioned, Reinventing Organizations, which is basically like anyone can be a decision maker, but they need to consult with people who will be affected by the decision and perhaps experts in the space, and it's up to them to gather the right amount of input. And you need to gauge some decisions. The right amount of input is literally everybody having input, and some decisions it's literally one person just going ahead. I think about this a lot now because the group I'm working with is a fully remote distributed startup team, and compared to my previous work with Inspiral, like Inspiral probably errs on the side of involving too many people and making decisions too heavy. And if I were going to throw out some examples, as I was asked, specific examples from the Inspiral experience would probably be like that. It's like it's gone wrong when we haven't got the balance right of empowering people to just go ahead and try things. Like if it's something that can be changed later, or it's low risk, just go for it. Just do the experiment and then talk about, what you've learned or how it came out or whatever. And don't, hang back being afraid of, oh, I don't want to step on toes or whatever. Whereas, if it's something big, or it's going to, it's got a huge liability risk or something and actually needs to go past the board for a formal decision-making process, know what the criteria is for that. And then the current team that I'm working with, Open Collective, it's like fully distributed. Everybody's super autonomous and independent and self-motivated. And perhaps we don't come together enough to get on the same page about bigger strategy questions. So that's something that I've kind of introduced on this team more, is like, let's get a bit more explicit about what are our longer term goals? Where do we want to be in 6 months? How do we align our daily work with those longer goals, as opposed to just kind of following whatever's interesting that day or getting distracted by projects that pop up. And so it really depends on the group that you're working with, what gotchas you need to be looking out for.
One thing that's really amazing about Lumio, I think what's impressed me too, I surveyed this area, or this field of distributed governance. So we came across maybe 98 tools or so, with maybe half of them active. Lumio is like technically very simple, right? It's not super complicated. What's interesting that you have developed this sort of methodology around it, right? That is just equally important. So to really think about like how to make decisions, right? Like things flame up in meetings, and then people go home and discuss it online, and then they vote again, and then maybe a decision is made. Things like that. I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, I think we live in an interesting time with the technology that's available to us, and that we have an opportunity to use it really well to enhance our human capabilities in this space. And it's not in any way to take away from the importance of face-to-face conversations or relationships or anything, but I think a great skill for a group to use is to understand when to use that very high bandwidth communication where you're in person or you're on a synchronous call. Only one person can speak at a time. You can't pause it to go read a document or whatever. You need to be thinking carefully about how people are engaging, so that, certain people don't dominate, or so that you're spending our time on the right things. And, that's a very important and useful space. But there are times when actually deferring to the online layer is way better for times when it's like, yeah, read this complicated document and give your comments. That's not a face-to-face meeting type of subject. Or, if you've got people in your group who are perhaps more thoughtful communicators who need some time to process and then come back and write out their thoughts. If your group constantly works on this kind of like high speed back and forth basis, you're just never going to hear from those people. But it's not like they don't have great ideas, So thinking very deeply about the strengths of diversity in your group, different tools, different kinds of communication tools for different purposes. I could say the same thing for sort of the whole tool belt that a good facilitator might bring to a group's communication, which is like, sometimes the answer is everybody go off and individually write down, what is your response to this or what is your idea. Sometimes it's about like, we need to do a post-it cloud and like, do dot voting or whatever. Or sometimes we need to actually get out and take a walk and leave this room because we've used up all the air. And actually like having a whole skill set and tool set around this, including the offline and the online space, like that's what's required to sort of reach your full potential as a group in terms of your human communication and collaboration capacity.
There was a question, yeah, Preston.
Hello, hi.
Good afternoon. So I have a couple of questions, and you can kind of figure out how you want to answer it. One being, I'm extremely interested in financial institutions, and I'm wondering if there was like a blue sky kind of out there. How do you envision a decentralized, non-hierarchical financial institution? And then something else that I think a lot about, and especially when trying to make decisions with everyone, is groupthink. And typically for people like me, majority thought doesn't go so well. It's usually not that great. So with that in mind, how do you come to a consensus, but also come to a consensus knowing that the majority might not always be right?
Yeah, two good questions. Cool. So financial institution, wow, I mean, most of my work has been in a sort of maybe a smaller scale group setting, like a few hundred people, whereas when you say financial institution, I'm thinking about like a massive bank or something like that. But maybe there's some overlap. Like, I think just experimenting with money tools I found it to be super powerful. So a couple of tools that I've made, Co-Budget, for example, is like it's a tool for kind of internal crowdfunding where you give out money to lots of people and then people can propose projects and decide which projects they want their money to go to. And it's a way of deciding what to do with shared resources. And I guess just being aware.
Within Spiral, right? Like, didn't you put
That's right, yeah.
20% of the money to the side? So everybody has their incomes, right? And 20% of the income of everybody in the network is put in this pot, and then people can decide, right, what to do with it. Like, give it to a project they think is really important, right?
Yeah, that's definitely where it came from, and it's now used by lots of different groups because we turned it into a piece of open source software, and it's out there in the world if you want to try it. But it was just a practical answer to how do a large number of people get together and make decisions about money, and out of that, I came to realize that there are different tools you can apply. So Co-Budget is what I would call divergent financial decision making, and what that means is you make your decisions yourself as an individual and you put those all together, and the aggregate outcome of all of those decisions is the group's decision. So it's the same if you were going to like say vote or whatever. Your vote is an individual decision, and you can have divergent thinking among different people, but the aggregate outcome is a group decision. And then there's convergent decision making, is where you're trying to come to perhaps a unanimous agreement, or you're talking to each other and trying to convince each other and get on the same page and converge your thinking. And you might have even with the same group and the same money, depending on whether you did a divergent or a convergent process, you might come out with very different decisions. And I would say like both of them can be good, and you just have to think about what's relevant in your context. So if you're concerned about, like as you said with groupthink, if you're concerned about protecting minority opinions or perhaps unusual ways of thinking or ideas coming out of left field, or making space for people who might not have the confidence to share their ideas if they don't think the rest of the group is on the same page as them. That's when divergent thinking is great, which is like, think about this individually, and then we have a process for bringing that into a group decision. Whereas if it's like really important that everybody feels like we made this decision together, then that's when convergent decision making is key. And currently now with my work in Open Collective, so Open Collective is basically, it's kind of like an evolution of a crowdfunding sort of model where we've got thousands and thousands of groups who each have their own budget and they're raising money in different ways. And then each of them then confronts this problem of like, oh, we've got money now, what do we do? Like, and I because I'm a nerd about this stuff, I love it. Like I get to see hundreds of answers to that question. And sometimes there's one person who makes all the decisions about what happens to the money in this group, and everybody's really happy about that because they don't want to make these decisions. Sometimes it's completely the other side of the spectrum that like this is a cooperative and this is all of our money and we have to make every single decision about a $10 expense we need to have a meeting about. And it really, the right answer really depends on the nature of the group. And there's some cool examples. So for example, if you give this much money to the project, then you join the governance steering committee, and that's a smaller group of people who are like a council that is making the decisions. Or maybe we have a voting process where it's like all the ideas are put out there and everybody votes, and then that's where the money goes. And there's every permutation possible coming out of this. And the cool thing about Open Collective is all of the finances in your Open Collective are transparent. So regardless of what choice you make about how to make decisions, at least the whole community can see it. You're accountable. You get automatic reports. And it just means that you're very likely to do a good job of communicating back to your community. Where does the money go? And it's, all that stuff is automated, which makes a huge difference. So sorry, that was like a bit of a disorganized answer to a very organized question, but I hope I touched on a few things.
Does a thumbs up.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I recommended it, Open Collective, yesterday to a young entrepreneur.
Oh, cool.
And because, so I guess also for you here, the way I really see like an immediate value to like many people even who have projects here in the audience, right? It's like, so if you go to Open Collective if you don't want to go to a bank and start a business account, right? And all the paperwork and the craziness that comes with that, the paperwork, right, that comes with starting a business. And in fact, you don't even know if it will be profitable. You don't even know all of these things, right? So in going with Open Collective is like a really amazing way of getting this done. And I mean, how many people, so like just to establish some trust here, like how many people work with you? Like also thousands, right? Like how many businesses do you work with now?
On Open Collective, there are definitely thousands of projects on Open Collective. And it's a kind of like it's a combination of like a hack of crowdfunding and a hack of fiscal sponsorship. So a fiscal sponsorship is where one legal entity will kind of house a project under its umbrella and say, you can keep your money in our bank account and we'll use, our systems to pay your expenses. And that's a service that is sometimes offered. So for example, if you're going to receive a grant from a foundation, you're not necessarily set up as your own legal entity with your business bank account and an accountant hired and everything ready to go. So it's sometimes advantageous to like go live under somebody else's umbrella so you can receive that grant and do your project without having to set up all this infrastructure. And Open Collective is a tech tool to like make that process way more accessible. All kinds of organizations can come on as these umbrella organizations and then welcome individual collectives under their umbrella. So each of those sort of umbrella organizations, which we call fiscal hosts, is aimed at a different community. So for example, there's one that's US-based charity projects, and it's a 501c3 like tax deductible organization and has a certain mission and everything. So that's one very focused thing. There's one for climate activism groups in Europe. And so they have one legal entity and one bank account, but hundreds of groups get to use it and they don't all have to set up their own one. Or for example, networks of meetups, like maybe there's a big network of women programmer meetups who is on Open Collective, and they've got their one umbrella entity, and then each local chapter can get their own collective page with their own budget and do fundraising and everything without having to, like, if you wanted to volunteer to host this meetup in your city, that's cool, but do you really want to sign up for like holding funds on behalf of this project and paying taxes and like all this painful stuff that like we just want you to focus on like building your community and following your mission, not all this admin. So we do that painful admin for you, basically.
So something must be happening there in New Zealand that you have all these good ideas. I don't know. Any more questions? I don't want to go on too long. We had promised you half an hour. We're already over.
Sure, it's fine.
If not, we have references, and I guess if somebody has a question, it's okay to pass on your email address. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got like talks and stuff up on my website, and I just did my first course. I did a course based on Full Circle Leadership, which is a framework for understanding diverse types of leadership, and it was cool to do a 4-week course about it. There's also the book.
Right? Distributed, right?
Yeah, it was really cool. We had 16 people from I think 9 different countries all calling into weekly sessions online, and we did it as a distributed classroom type thing. That was really sweet. And yeah, there's also the book Better Work Together, which I would encourage people to look at because like I have a few chapters in there, but I also think it's important to realize that all of these kinds of projects are inherently cooperative, collaborative projects. And so hearing the other voices and the other take, like my take is not the only one. So check out the book if you want to hear lots of different perspectives on this work.
Well, thank you so much. And we hope maybe we get you to our next conference in Berlin in November.
Oh, that could be cool. We'll see. It's far from New Zealand. Why don't you all just come to New Zealand and hang out here?
We sort of circle around the world. This time Berlin. Okay.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, Deborah.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.
And I guess, yeah, we can. Do you hear the clapping? Yes. Okay. Okay. So this, I guess, is where the live stream would end. So I should say that next week we have a speaker in person, Doug O'Brien, who is the president of the American Co-op movement. And I asked, and I should say the American Business Association or Business Alliance. And I asked him a lot of very difficult questions that he would usually never answer. So I asked him about the politics of cooperatives. I asked him about, the specific history, also the different histories of cooperatives, not just in this country, but in their origin in the UK. And also about the disadvantages of cooperatives, right? Of course, there are also downsides to that model. So he will talk about all of that. So for those of you online, I hope you will join us next week again. And this is where we say goodbye to you.